Today is Forgive Your Mum and Dad Day, and I thought I'd share a story about forgiveness, about how I forgave my dad. I'm not going to talk about my mum because it's a different story, but um, it's a similar process. So I'm now 53 in 2020, and I was 30 years old when I was going through a process on a course, looking at my life, looking at where I wanted to be, look at what was getting in the way of me achieving the things that I wanted to achieve. And one of the problem areas in my life was, as I perceived it, was my relationship with my dad. It was, if this is very close, this end of the scale is very close, and this end is very distant, I'd probably say I was about here. We said the right things to each other, but there wasn't heart or feeling, or I didn't feel lots of love and connection with him. And that manifested by him kind of showing up late to sports, watch me in sports games, just kind of bumbling along and not being very articulate in my judgment about how he communicated with me in words of encouragement. And I longed for, my dad to give me the encouragement that I yearn for, as I think any young man does. And it came to a head when I bicycled through Africa. This was many years ago, in 1993, 94. And I finished the bicycle ride and I wanted to see him. I was really looking forward to seeing him. And he arrived late, which was, in my judgment, was quite typical of my dad. Arrived late, a bit chaotic, a little bit reminding me of myself, of course. But he arrived late, and after we'd celebrated our return from this momentous bicycle ride, which was 13,000 kilometers over 14 months, malaria 3 times, lots of other things, he was in the bath and we were chatting. And he said in the course of that conversation, he said, "Look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to be at your welcoming home party tomorrow, but I need to go to Cambridge to see my nephew, and I'm not going to be able to make it." And I was absolutely astounded. And for me at that time, it felt like all the proof that I needed that my dad didn't love me. Because of course I believed that if he loved me, he would have put me over his fairly distant nephew, as I judged it to be, as I judged their relationship to be. So I walked out of the bathroom and I said the following to myself, quietly to myself. I said, "F you, Dad, I will tolerate you for the rest of my life, but the sooner you die, the easier it will be me to just live my life free from you." And I then walked out, made the pretense of making him a cup of tea, and then carried on living my life with him. So you can imagine what being in a relationship with my dad was like. You can imagine maybe what it was like for him being in a relationship with me. And then a few years after that, I needed to work on some things in my life. And it was when I first came across kind of this whole thing called personal development. And one of the things that came up for me in that process was my relationship with my dad. And I realized that I was blaming my dad for really not taking responsibility for my life and blaming him for the places that I felt I should have been successful in. If my dad had loved me more, if he'd showed me more appreciation, if he'd blah, 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 then I would be in a better space than I am now. And like a bolt of lightning, I realized that I wasn't taking responsibility. I wasn't taking responsibility for my life, and I wasn't taking responsibility, most importantly, in my relationship with my dad. So right there and then I resolved I got to do this thing. I got to speak to him. I've got to apologize to him for what I felt he'd done to me. And he was on his honeymoon in Australia at the time. And I got hold of him eventually. I phoned 6 people to get his number. And I tracked him down. It was 11 o'clock local time. And the moment I heard his voice, I just sobbed. I just broke down. And he, of course, said, "Well, what's the matter?" He said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" I said, "No, it's fine. No one's died. I just realized that I've not been taking any responsibility in my relationship with you. And he was quite overawed by that and was very grateful that I'd called. And he said, you know, when we get back in a couple of weeks, we must talk about it. And then there was one thing that I wanted to say to my dad, which was really, 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 really hard, because I feared the rejection of it, but I knew that this was the time that I needed to do it. And I said to him, you know, the one thing that I wanted to hear most from him was, I love you. And so I said to him, Dad, there's one more thing. And he said, yes, what's that, old boy? And I said, I love you. And my heart was pounding in my ears, and he shot back. He didn't hesitate a moment. And he said, I love you too, old boy. And that was almost like a revelation for me, that here was a man who I judged to be so, so I suppose cowardly or mean-spirited or something, suddenly, as quick as a flash, when I opened up my heart and opened up what I needed to say, he responded. And he came back a couple of weeks later. I met him at the airport. I had a quivering bottom lip and tears in my eyes as I contemplated meeting my dad, and we got talking. And what emerged in that conversation was my dad telling me what it was like growing up as a young boy and as a young man with no positive male role models around him at all. His father was an Indian Army general who'd spent 35 years in India. He got a letter from him twice a year, once at Christmas and once on his birthday. And he had no idea how to be a dad. He had no idea how to express himself. He was told as a child, children should be seen and not heard. And so how could he be a father to me, certainly against my high standards of what I felt a father should be? And then there was one final thing that I needed to ask him, is what happened when he said he wanted I said to him, what happened when you said you wanted to go see your nephew rather than come to my welcoming home party? And he said, oh no. I said, why? And he said, well, it wasn't true. I just made it up because I didn't go and see your nephew. I went to have lunch with someone else in the village. And the reason I couldn't bear to be there was because your mother was there with her new husband, and I couldn't bear to be with that. And I said, I understand. I wish I'd known, And that was a complete revelation and a salvation in my relationship with my dad. And it took me to actually own and take responsibility for my part in my relationship with my dad. So I think forgiveness is not so much about, I forgive you for what you did, but more, this is what I am taking responsibility for that I haven't said up to this point. So please be encouraged. Speak to your mum and dad, and just share your heart with them, no matter how difficult and how challenging and however much fear you face. Trust that the actual saying of it, even if it doesn't have the desired outcome, will be the healing process in itself. So good luck, and I'd love to know how you get on. Thanks for listening.